Have you ever had a thought that made you instantly stop and think, why would I think that? Maybe you're sitting in silence in class, at home, or just trying to relax, and suddenly your brain throws something completely random at you. What if I just shouted something right now? Or you're in a serious moment, maybe praying, focusing, or trying to stay calm, and out of nowhere, a thought appears that feels completely unwanted, inappropriate, or even disrespectful. Maybe you're near something risky and your mind suddenly goes, what if something bad happens right now? Or you send a message and immediately think, what if they misunderstood me and hate me now? In that moment, you don't feel like yourself anymore because you don't agree with the thought. You don't want it. It feels completely out of character. And that's usually when people start worrying. What is wrong with me? But psychology says something very important. Nothing is wrong with you. In psychology, these are called intrusive thoughts. They are unwanted, automatic thoughts that enter your mind without permission, intention, or warning. Research in cognitive psychology shows something surprising. Most people experience intrusive thoughts at some point in their lives, even people without anxiety, trauma, or any mental illness. So the existence of the thought is not the problem. The real problem is how the brain interprets it. Most people assume, if I thought it, it must mean something about me. But psychology strongly disagrees with that idea. Your brain is not designed to produce only positive thoughts. It is constantly generating mental activity, thousands of thoughts every single day. Most of them are filtered out automatically like background noise, but sometimes a thought feels strange, emotionally intense, or completely out of character, and that's the moment your attention locks onto it. Here's the key: your brain doesn't prioritize thoughts because they are true. It prioritizes them because they are noticeable. Anything shocking, uncomfortable, or unexpected gets flagged as important, even when it isn't. There's a well-known concept in psychology called ironic process theory. It explains something very simple. When you try not to think about something, your brain has to constantly monitor whether you're thinking about it, and that monitoring actually brings the thought back again. That's why the more you try to suppress a thought, the more it returns, not because it's meaningful, not because it's dangerous, but because your brain keeps scanning for it. The cycle becomes simple. A thought appears, you panic, you try to remove it, it comes back stronger, and then you panic again. Another important idea in psychology is that your brain is essentially a prediction machine. A huge part of thinking involves constantly running what-if scenarios. What if I fail? What if something goes wrong? What if I say something embarrassing? This is actually useful for survival and planning because your brain is constantly trying to prepare you for possible outcomes. But sometimes it generates extreme, irrational, or completely random scenarios that don't match reality. Most of these thoughts disappear instantly. However, the ones that create a strong emotional reaction stick in your attention. That's why intrusive thoughts feel personal, even though they are not. This is the most important part. In psychology, a thought is not a belief, a thought is not an intention, and a thought is not your identity. Just because your brain produces a thought does not mean you agree with it. It doesn't mean you want it, and it certainly doesn't mean it represents who you are. Your mind is not a truth machine. It's an idea generator. Some ideas are useful, some are random, and some are completely meaningless. Here's something most people don't realize. The fact that intrusive thoughts bother you is actually meaningful. It usually shows that the thought goes against your values. That discomfort is your brain saying, this is not who you are. So instead of being a sign of danger, it is often a sign of self-awareness. People who act on harmful thoughts usually don't feel disturbed by them, but people who strongly disagree with those thoughts do, and that difference matters. So what should you do when these thoughts appear? First, don't panic. Second, don't overanalyze them. Third, don't attach meaning to them, because the more importance you give them, the more your brain repeats them. Instead, simply recognize it's a thought, not a message, not a warning, and not me. Then let it pass. At the end of the day, your mind will always generate thoughts you don't expect. Random thoughts, strange thoughts, and even uncomfortable thoughts. That's simply part of being human, but you are not your thoughts. You are the one noticing them, and that is what makes you in control, not the thoughts themselves.